On a Christmas Eve wrapped in the kind of icy silence that settles only across the empty plains of northern Montana, the lone rancher Ezra Cole rode back toward his weather-beaten homestead, with nothing but the groan of saddle, leather and the wheeze of a tired wind for company, his thoughts drifting between the holiday he would once again spend alone and the small aches of a life, lived mostly in the shadow of wide fields and louder ghosts, when suddenly he saw two tiny figures at the abandoned bus stop near Miller's Junction, huddled under a flickering light that turned the falling snow into ribbons of ash. And as he drew closer, he saw a little girl no older than 8, her cheeks red with cold, her braids stiff with frost, and a boy even smaller clutching her coat as though he might disappear entirely if he let go. And when Ezra asked gently what they were doing out there in the dead cold, the girl looked up with eyes too old for her small face and said in a trembling voice that punched straight through his ribcage, "Sir, can you buy us? Mister, we're not trying to cause trouble. Just somewhere warm. We heard people buy things they want for Christmas." A sentence so heartbreaking, so disarmingly innocent in its misunderstanding of the world's cruelties, that Ezra felt the ground tilt beneath him as his throat tightened, for he recognized in those children the same abandonment that had once shaped him as a boy. And the girl, May explained in halting English dotted with Cantonese syllables, that their father had passed away 2 months before, and their mother, overwhelmed with grief and without legal papers or work, had been taken away during an immigration sweep at the packing plant, leaving them with only a bag of clothes, a worn photograph, and the naive plan to find someone kind enough to take them in before the cold swallowed them whole. And despite Ezra's rough exterior and long-practiced solitude, he found himself dismounting immediately, lifting both freezing children into his arms and wrapping them in his coat, shocked by how light they were, how desperately they clung to him, how May kept whispering to her little brother, and that everything would be okay now because the cowboy seemed like a hero from the stories their mother used to tell them at night, all while Ezra guided his horse back home through the storm, forcing down memories he had buried years ago, memories of a childhood spent in a foster system where kindness was rarer than warmth in winter and people seemed to trade children in and out of homes like borrowed tools, where the idea of someone wanting you felt like make-believe. And as he brought them into his ranch house, the warmth hitting their faces like a sudden miracle, he fed them hot stew and listened quietly as they told him about their mother's promise to return for them one day, a hope so fragile that Ezra dared not touch it with truth, instead assuring them they were safe tonight and could rest without fear, though inside he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years, responsibility, protectiveness, the terrifying possibility of belonging, while outside the storm howled and snow climbed the windows like a rising tide, sealing the three of them in a cocoon of unexpected fate. And unbeknownst to Ezra, this Christmas Eve, once destined to be just another lonely night, was becoming the opening chapter of the most important fight of his life, a fight to shield 2 abandoned children from a system that had nearly chewed him up once, and a fight to figure out whether he could open his heart again after so many years spent locking it away, because when May fell asleep by the fireplace, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. You saved us," Ezra realized with a shuddering breath that these children weren't something he could just help tonight. They were something that had already chosen him, reshaping the very air in his home. And he went to bed, unable to shake the feeling that he had been thrust into a crossroads where compassion would demand everything he had left. By morning the storm had quieted, but Ezra's mind had not. For as he watched May carefully button up Jian's small jacket, still too thin for the frost outside, he felt a profound tug that forced him to consider what he'd only dared to think in fragmented echoes the night before. The idea that these children, frightened yet brave, discarded yet hopeful, were now tethered to his soul in a way that seemed both accidental and destined And when he saddled up his truck to drive into town for supplies, he noticed how May hesitated at the doorway, stepping outside only after verifying 3 times that he was truly waiting for them, not pretending, not tricking them, which struck Ezra like a dagger because it revealed how deeply the world had already failed them. And throughout the day, he found himself noticing the tiny things, how May's eyes scanned each room automatically as if expecting danger, how Jen clung to the stuffed alpaca he found in Ezra's attic as if it were the last remnant of comfort he understood, how they both listened to his voice with a mixture of hope and disbelief whenever he spoke gently, until he realized they were measuring him, testing whether he might be the rare adult who didn't break promises, abandon or trade kindness for conditions. And this realization solidified a streak of resolve in Ezra that had once been the backbone of his younger, braver self, the self he'd lost after too many years alone. And so when he took them into town and faced the curious glances of neighbors who'd long assumed Ezra would die without ever letting anyone close, he stood taller, introducing the children by name and daring anyone to question him, even though he knew the battle ahead would not be against gossip, but against paperwork, bureaucracy, and the merciless machinery that governed displaced children, especially those without proper documentation like May and Jian. And sure enough, when the county office learned about them, the social worker, though sympathetic, explained with cold logic that the children needed to be processed, taken to a holding center, until they could be matched with relatives or placed within the system. Words that ignited a fierce, unfamiliar fire in Ezra's chest, because the very thought of them being swallowed by the same system that had once taught him how disposable a child could feel was unacceptable. And he stood his ground with a tone so sharp and steady that the room fell silent, declaring that the kids were staying with him until a judge said otherwise, which brought him temporary custody but also launched him into a daunting legal whirlwind. And over the following days, as Christmas crept closer, the ranch that had once echoed with nothing but the sounds of livestock now shimmered with unexpected life. By learning to crack eggs for breakfast, in trying to follow Ezra around the barn while shouting, "Cowboy! Cowboy!" every time he saw a hat, the two of them decorating the house with paper snowflakes cut unevenly but lovingly, transforming the once quiet home into a small sanctuary of warmth and laughter that Ezra didn't know he had missed. And in that warmth he discovered that something inside him, once rigid with loneliness, had begun to soften. And as he helped May write a letter to her missing mother, promising they were safe, promising they had found someone who cared, Ezra realized he wasn't just providing temporary shelter, he was becoming the person he had once prayed for as a lost boy. Someone steady, someone loyal, someone who didn't give up. And so, on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 week after he'd found them under that flickering streetlight, Ezra gathered the two children by the fireplace and told them that no matter how hard the road ahead became, no matter what courts or officials or circumstances tried to demand, he wasn't letting them go, that they were his family now, and he would fight for them with every ounce of strength the ranch, the land, and his battered heart had left. A promise so powerful that May burst into tears, not from fear, but relief, whispering through sobs that no one had ever chosen them before. And Gian crawled into Ezra's lap, falling asleep instantly, as though finally believing the world had stopped spinning long enough to feel safe. And in that moment, surrounded by crackling firelight, Ezra felt something ancient and transformative rise within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since boyhood, a certainty that these two children weren't just saved by him, but were saving him right back, filling the hollow spaces inside him with the quiet, steady warmth of belonging. And he understood that this Christmas Eve was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one, a story of healing, of courage, and of a family built not by blood, but by love chosen freely, fiercely, and forever. The days that followed felt strangely gentle, as though the ranch itself had begun to breathe slower now that 3 hearts lived beneath its roof instead of one. But on the first morning after Christmas, Ezra found May standing outside in the snow, clutching something in her mittened hands, her expression tight with confusion and hope tangled together. And when he stepped closer, she handed him a damp envelope sealed with a government stamp. Ezra felt his stomach drop even before he opened it, knowing all too well what official letters tended to bring. Yet when he tore it open, the words inside struck him like a sudden gust of winter air. The authorities had found May and Jian's mother. She was alive, detained but fighting to be released, pleading desperately for her children. And the letter said she was attempting to petition the court so they could be reunited. May looked at Ezra with those wide, uncertain eyes and whispered, "Does this mean we have to go?" And though the question sliced him open, Ezra knelt in the snow so he was eye level with her and told her the truth, that their mother loved them and was trying to come back, that nothing would ever stop a mother from fighting for her children, and that whatever happened next, he would stand beside them through every step. May pressed her forehead against his, shaking slightly, torn between longing and fear, while Jian wrapped his arms around Ezra's leg, refusing to let go. Ezra lifted them both, carrying them inside where the fire still burned, thinking about how love sometimes meant holding on and sometimes meant preparing to let go, but always staying, always protecting. And though uncertainty hung over them like a storm cloud, Ezra felt a quiet strength settle in his chest. Whatever the courts demanded, whatever the world tried, these children weren't alone anymore. Not ever again.